Hello everyone. We are now in the last session of day 2 of 2021 PAMS. I am Jisun Park, creative producer from Producer Group. Audio description. I am an Asian woman in the late 40s. I have dark brown short hair. I am wearing black dress and black jacket. This year, PAMS explores next mobility in the world after the pandemic. We're here to discuss digital and green mobility. At the roundtable session, our theme is Artists' Creative Activities on Climate Change. This planet, human life, Earth's ecosystem, and its sustainability are keywords in the contemporary world. We have to change our perspective and take action. So, why does climate change matter for arts and artists? What role can we play? Let's now hear about creative response measures. Today, we are joined by panelists from all around the world, from Seoul, New York, Halifax in Canada, and London as well. I believe it is 9 a.m. in New York, must be 10 a.m. in Halifax, and London is at 2 p.m. Here in Seoul, it's over 10 p.m. in the night. So we are joined by all time zones given in one day. Beyond time and space, let's now talk about next mobility together. We have 4 presentations by 5 people. First, Boram Kim from Untitled Road. Next, Hyewon Ian Francine Durong from Blooming Ludas. B. Yudeo Smith is from Pigfoot Theater. And last but not least, Sangtae Bilodo is from Climate Change Theater Action. We share one thing, which is concern about climate change and artwork. Another common denominator is that we make practices. Let's hear from each one about climate change and art. Our first presenter is Boram Kim from Untitled Road. Boram Kim is artistic director and media artist. Kim has been using game to share stories with people. Audience can experience narrative in game theater created by Kim. I am interested. Kim, the floor is yours.
Hello, I am Creative Group Untitled Road's director, Kim Boram. I have a very short black hair. I'm Asian. In Korea, we have autumn, so my shirt has a change of leaves colors. So I focus on games' various characteristics. I make experience-based game theater. I sometimes make application for the performance, so audience make their own choices. They have own stories, and then they carry out their own missions. And I use 3D stereoscopic sounds to make sounds in VR space, so that audience can experience stories in my work. Until 2020, I knew about climate crisis, but I wasn't particularly interested. So when I get a coffee takeout, I use tumbler and I recycle my garbages very thoroughly, and most of all, I ate meat. Then I had a chance to work with this forum's moderator, Park Ji-sun, to join Hwacheon Climate Crisis Residency, and climate crisis related scientific data and IPCC reports show us what our future will be, what the future of our next generation will be, and I thought I should find something that I can do as an artist. So I made a board game. The title is A Movable Forest. So last year, end of December, it was announced, and I'm doing the beta test of the game. It's still under development. So, if I may introduce briefly, in the board game, the trees are under crisis because of the climate crisis, especially needle-leaved trees. According to the scientists, because of the rapid rise of the temperature, the trees, in order for them to survive, they have to move 6.4 kilometers to the north every year. But obviously, they cannot move on their own. So there are 4 human characters: politician, researcher, activist, and entrepreneur. They have to achieve their own goals, but at the same time, they have to move trees to the sanctuary. So winning the game and getting the target is important, but if they don't reduce their carbon emission up into appropriate rebate, wildfire and other disasters will take place, and the burdens will be on everybody. So earlier this year, I was invited by a fine art museum, and last week my exhibition was open. So I made the a forest really big from the board game, and it's called Movable Forest House on Fire. So the forest is really big, and the audience is going through the space and then take a role of activist, chatting with the researcher to keep the trees alive. So sound, lighting, and web is connected in real time in the game format for 20 minutes. Let's watch short highlights video. This exhibition was planned earlier this year in March, and when I sent the proposal to the exhibition center, this was not it at all. This is what I originally planned. So the audience can feel the temperature rise of the Earth in the exhibition. Climate crisis, temperature rise, and then their effects to the forest and frequent wildfire and other disasters are what I wanted the audience to feel in my work. Back then, my goals were firstly not to make any garbages. The problem was my goal when I set the goal not to make any garbages. During the research, to change electricity to heat, I learned that it consumes a lot of energy. So on the left is a fan that I have in my house, and it's a measurement of the electricity consumption. And on the right is a mini electrical oven that I use when I make small toast. So as I'm looking at this, I thought to change electricity to heat, like the consumption was incredibly high. The bigger problem was that the exhibition space that I was assigned to, the maximum electricity that I could use was 10 kilowatts per hour. So in order to tackle this problem, at first I was looking for ways to secure additional electricity, and I thought maybe I can rent out solar power equipment. But in Korea, electricity is in the government is in charge of electricity. So for an individual to create large amount of electricity wasn't easy. And in order to use solar energy to create a large amount of energy stably was technically really challenging. So in order to create a large amount of energy using gasoline was the easiest way. So that rendered my original proposal impossible, and I set up a new goal. So in addition to the first goal, not to make any garbages, my second goal was to minimize the maximum amount of electricity, and let's put it into design when I make my performance. So this is what you saw in the video. This is my second proposal. So stack up paper box to create a tree shaped object, and then for that I called upon people who collect used boxes, and I asked them to rent the boxes to me for 3 weeks. And this you see right now is that there are prints on the box. I had to flip them over. So this is a video of how I prepared my exhibition. So in terms of the lighting, so this space can only 10 kilowatt is can only be used in this space. So all of the lights were LED and some performance moving lighting and commercially used LED lightings were used in the mixture. And each devices have the electricity meter, so we take the estimates. So the entire electricity that we use at the exhibition space is 5.85 kilowatt per hour. And this is the small mini oven that I showed previously. So it is equivalent of 8 hours of this mini oven use. I wonder whether my performance is more meaningful and tasteful than the bread, and I'm not sure yet. So during preparing for the performance, I wanted to minimize the waste, but not using any was impossible. Audio and lighting cables are exposed as they were, and in order to prevent the audiences to trip over, we had to use large amount of tape, and in this we couldn't find any alternative. The crisis is here, and we cannot turn away from it. So at first, when I saw a large amount of data about climate crisis, I thought maybe not doing anything is the answer. However, now not doing anything probably doesn't change anything. That's my belief. So today, I want to take the opportunity to share my own challenges in the era of climate crisis. I wonder how you looked at it, and I wonder whether you have any advices to share. Thank you.
Right. Climate change and climate crisis. So we are really feeling these problems. So you mentioned that it started last year. There's a lot of knowledge and information included. So this is about the question, what kind of responsibility do artists have? What role can art play here? Is it more meaningful than making bread, making toast? So we do share a lot of concerns in this era, I believe. We have other presenters who have been thinking about this issue for longer, right? We're going to listen to a lot of experiences and a lot of stories. This way, we can find a new direction for the future. So I thought of other artists. Other artists may want to share advice, and some people might have questions. We have YouTube channel, and you can leave your questions there on YouTube. Please participate in our discussion as well. Our second presenters are from Blooming Ludas. We're joined by Haewon Lee and Francine Durong. Blooming Ludas consists of two artists from Korea and from Canada. They are dealing with climate change, a gigantic issue, by meeting with various communities. So one person is in Seoul, the other person is in Canada. Blooming Ludas, the floor is yours.
안녕하세요. Hello, my name is Haewon. I'm a theater maker based in Seoul, one half of Blooming Ludas. I'm an East Asian woman with a dark brown hair with a short ponytail. I'm wearing a gray jumper with short sleeves with a tiny necklace.
Hello, my name is Francine Dulong, and I'm in Halifax, Chipuktuk, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I have white skin and curly hair to my shoulders that's white and brown, and I'm wearing a green collared top.
We are Blooming Ludus, a participatory theater company connecting people, art, and the environment for climate justice and a sustainable future. We started our company because we knew the earth was in trouble, but we felt like we were not seeing this story reflected back to us. Climate narratives can be very science heavy and easily dismissed because of their complexity. Many people we talked to felt powerless. We wanted to make climate issues tangible and physical for audiences to help them break down big ideas and ask themselves how these issues touch their lives all through play.
We research all of our shows with communities through academic and scientific journals. We study policy, we study other artists and art made around subjects in climate justice, and we try to interview all of these stakeholders in person as much as possible when we have the chance. So basically, we choose a subject, we dive deep into it and talk to everyone involved, from community members to policymakers to politicians, anybody. And then we come out with a participatory show that the audience can get directly involved in. And for us, making and learning together is action.
Our journey started in 2015. A group of applied theater students from Royal Central School of Speech and Drama created a participatory project called Solstice Tree for the Canning Town Light Night Festival in London. The piece explored how locals in London felt about recycling and what their wishes were for the future.
Now, there are many aspects to choose from when making work about climate justice. So often, Heywan and I choose a subject that is close to us personally and is related to the current popular discussion of the time and the partners that we have. So here are a few of our favorite projects we're going to share with you. The one you see here is Power Story. Power Story is a game theater piece initiating questions and discussion around fracking and sustainable energy. This was in 2016, 2017 in the UK, and it was a very hot topic for the public because the government was pushing fracking in the country. We made the show by breaking down how energy is produced and consumed in the UK. We spoke to water protectors and visited anti-fracking camps and spoke to the towns that would be most affected by this development. And now there is a moratorium on fracking in the UK since 2019.
The River Save Mouse is a community theatre project at the Creekside Discovery Centre in London with young people from the Tidemill Academy and the senior members of Third Thought. We also have been participating in the Climate Change Theatre Action since 2019, which you will be hearing more about from Chantal Bilodeau later. We ran play reading programs for youth and families at the West Seoul Arts Center for Learning in Seoul in 2019. And we're going to talk more about how we will participate this year later at this presentation.
How much space do we need for living is a participatory pansori project created through an international collaboration with Taru in Seoul. This project explores questions around sustainable urban living spaces in London and Seoul through workshops and performances. And this project is continued from 2016 to 2020. And it really came from the feeling that Heywan and I had about our own questions around sustainable living in the cities that we found ourselves in. And Salt and Vinegar is our Atlantic Cod musical rock comedy duo who sing about ocean sustainability from the perspective of fish. And it is usually a street theater piece.
Our original plan for 2020 was to revamp the show, write some new songs, and strengthen the characters to continue our part in the global ocean plastics awareness campaign. So we had started working across Seoul and Halifax, Canada, only getting together once a year to take into account the air travel that was necessary for us to work together. And we were very excited to see each other again in person, away from our remote working schedule. But the pandemic really changed what we could do.
With Haywan in Seoul and myself in Canada, we decided to make Salt and Vinegar into YouTube puppet stars. So we assembled a cracking team in Korea to support us in making a puppet musical extravaganza. And we tried to use recycled materials as much as possible. And you can see a few pictures of our process here.
In making Salt and Vinegar, we also added young people's voices through a community workshop in Seoul. So even though we couldn't meet children in other places, we made an activity book still available on our website so that families could expand the experience at home during the lockdown.
We were really proud of what we had achieved with Salt and Vinegar. It was a very big challenge to move that work online. But of course, as many of us were feeling, we were feeling very lonely during the pandemic. So we decided to reach out to our community of artist makers. And we started Green Connections in the COVID-19 pandemic, a series of online community events to move through the pandemic together.
Climate Justice Tea Time was a gathering exploring our responsibility as artists within the climate crisis. In the space between art and activism, where do we find ourselves? Sometimes a cup of tea with good companions is the best way to unpick this sticky question.
And our second event in that series was our Blooming Ludus Green Forum. And this event aimed to create a language of solidarity around the climate crisis, asking questions about what do we love and want to protect? What are our personal experiences and connections to climate change? And how do they shape the work that we make?
The forum gathered artists and art curious folks to meet like minded people and explore how art can be action in both our professional and personal lives. We had fantastic panels you can see in the screen and workshops run by artists from Canada, the UK, Guam, Korea, and parts of Europe.
Now in 2021, Haywan has written a play for the CCTA, for Climate Change Theatre Action, entitled So This is the Last Apple Pie. And we will be presenting this as part of an afternoon of art and workshops, all about how climate change and environmental justice impacts apples and food growing. And that event will be happening here in Nova Scotia, and it's connected to Korea as well.
In Korea, me and other team will be creating a short documentary film exploring the apple and the climate change. So we're gonna interview some apple farmers and their families and see how our relationship is changing around the apple and climate change. So spread across the planet, a lot has changed for us in the 6 years since we started Blooming Ludus. We are honored to share our experience with you, reflect on how far we have come, and discover where we all stand together.
For more information about Blooming Ludus and our projects, please check out our website and our YouTube channel. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you from my side. Due to the pandemic, it's been quite long since you two met each other, right? But maybe that's why we've got green tea time. We got green connection. We have so many green options now. There are new cards on the table. We can now talk about solidarity among artists. I believe a lot of discourses appeared last year and this year. In our discussion session later, we will talk about how art can be translated into activities and actions Our third presenter is from Pigfoot Theater, B. Yudeo Smith, Artistic Director. As you can see from the name of the theater, Pigfoot is carbon neutral. Let's hear about how they respond to climate crisis and ecological transition and how they design energy productive theater.
Hi, my name is Theodore Smith and I'm part of Pigfoot Theatre. I use the pronouns she, her, and as an audio description, I have white skin, bright purple hair, and I'm wearing a black top with a necklace with a cross on it. I'm gonna start sharing my screen now. Hopefully that is visible for everyone. So before I start, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here today, all the way from London. I think I've got the best option here because it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm very relaxed and I'm very impressed by everyone who's up so late or so early in Korea or in Canada. So Pigfoot is the UK's first explicitly carbon neutral theatre company. We embrace the ecosystems and global connectivity, and we make new work with and for those facing the climate crisis, as well as running workshops with schools, young people, and theatre makers. Our theatre practices what it preaches and protests from within an industry which, in London alone, has been shown to have a carbon footprint of 50,000 tonnes a year. So to explain a bit more about our work, I want to give examples of two of our most recent shows. First, our bike-powered family comedy, How to Save a Rock. This show is particularly targeted at children and their families. We made the show to encourage children and young people to still have hope in the face of climate change. To begin to answer the question, why is it important for artists to respond to the climate crisis? I wanted to share a study which was done recently in the UK, which included young people from 10 countries across the world, including countries in the global north, like the UK, France, and the US, as well as countries in the global south, like Brazil, the Philippines, and Nigeria. Unfortunately, the study did not include South Korea, but I thought it was an interesting one to share, as it's quite rare to have a study which looks at young people internationally rather than just within one country. If there is a similar study in South Korea, I'd be really interested to read it. So this study showed that 56% of young people said that humanity was doomed due to climate change. 75% of young people said the future is frightening due to climate change. And 83% of young people said they would have less opportunity than their parents because of climate change. Another study recently done in the UK showed that young people, more than any other age, feel a personal responsibility to reduce climate change, but don't believe that their individual actions will help, or that enough people will take collective action to reduce the impact of the climate crisis. And most young people also don't believe that governments in enough countries will take action. So in short, the majority of young people are very aware of the climate crisis and of what's going to happen if we don't make the changes required to mitigate it. But they don't believe that those changes will happen. They believe, in short, that the future is doomed. And that's a really frightening thing to think, especially when you're a young child or a teenager and you're trying to plan for your future. So our show, How to Save a Rock, explores a character who has lost hope and does think that the future's doomed. But over the course of the play, she learns various different ways that she can make change within her own life, and that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other people around her who also want to take climate action. The play ends with the narrative disintegrating into a conversation where audience members are introduced to each other and encouraged to talk to each other about what motivates them to take climate action. So the show creates a community of audience members who have seen the show, know a bit about each other, and feel supported by each other's motivation and action. Another show we're currently developing is called Hot in Here, a carbon neutral dance party. The show contains interviews with over 30 young climate advocates from around the world, from 23 different countries, particularly those in the global south and nearest the equator, as those are the areas worst affected by climate change. The show explores what it means to be global, which has lots of different definitions, but the one that I like the most is engaging with local issues with a global outlook or awareness. So here are a few stills from a digital work in progress of Hot in Here, which we streamed online at the beginning of this year. We created the show in response to the interviews we held with these global advocates, but we made it in collaboration with a group of young people from London. So it had a really interesting dual focus between, for example, an advocate from Dominica and a young person from London whose family comes from Dominica and actually hadn't heard about the climate crisis's effects there until they listened to our interview with that advocate. As I mentioned earlier, we are an entirely carbon neutral theatre company. So this means that we generate our own energy live during performance. The picture you can see here is from an R&D of our new show, Hot in Here, that I was just talking about. And the wooden tiles in the picture are prototypes for an energy harvesting dance floor, which converts the kinetic energy of performers' footsteps into electricity, which powers the lights you can see. For our family show, How to Save a Rock, we use a bicycle, which our actors cycle during the performance, again, which converts kinetic energy into electricity. There are lots of other things we do to stay sustainable. We always have recycling bins and rehearsals, only travel on public transport where possible. Our published scripts and marketing materials are printed on recycled paper and so on. And we share this initial checklist with companies when we're encouraging them to engage with their own carbon footprint. And I just wanted to share one or two tips for each of these sections. So as we were hearing about earlier, what's really fantastic to do is to set a lighting and design, to create a lighting and sound design which considers the carbon impact of the technology you're using, or even sets an energy cap as a challenge for your lighting and sound designer, forcing them to use LED light bulbs only or amplifiers with a lower energy usage, such as a D-class amp. Travel, it goes without saying, but we only travel by public transport. We hire electric vans and use biodiesel as well. And the other thing we wanted to flag here is that within the UK, it's been shown that touring theatre shows, 78% of their carbon footprint comes from the travel of the audiences to see the show. And there's lots of ways you can try and impact audience behavior. So you could offer a percentage of tickets free to local audiences who can access the venue on foot, or you could offer discounts to members of the public who can prove they travel by public transport. And then finally, design is obviously a really big one that we've already heard about today. It's almost impossible to create a show without throwing something away at the end. But just as a few suggestions, you could obviously buy or hire materials secondhand, from batteries to building materials. We have recently got into borrowing props, and we're looking at setting up a network within the UK where anyone can borrow a prop from another person, and also committing to a closed loop design process where the afterlife of the object is as important as its initial use. So you could do that by repurposing objects into the design of your next show, or donating your design items or selling them on. And the thing that we found crucial there is engaging with the afterlife of materials before we buy them. So we're only allowing ourselves to buy them once we know what's going to happen to them after we've finished using them. But there are some carbon emissions that we haven't yet learned how to avoid. So this is a bar chart of our remaining carbon impact from May 2020 to 2021, so over the last year, which we shared publicly across our social media and website. As you can see, transport and purchases account for most of our emissions. To run through this quickly, the carbon emissions of each item are in the right-handmost column, and the central column gives you a breakdown of more details, so hours on a laptop, miles on a bus, and so on. We mostly travel by train. We actually traveled nearly 4,000 miles, which was 8 times more our transport by car. But as you can see, our train carbon emissions were only 1.5 times our car carbon emissions, obviously showing the huge positive impact of transitioning to public transport. We also calculated our digital carbon footprint. That's included within energy use. So that means we recorded how many hours we spent on laptops, how many hours of video calls we took, and the number of participants, and how many emails we sent, and so on. Because our shows were all streamed last year because theatre couldn't be performed in person in the UK, we didn't have any emissions from audience transport, but we did measure the impact of our audience streaming our shows. And finally, our largest cost last year was first-hand purchases. So we buy all our production materials secondhand, as I mentioned, but there are some things that we have to buy firsthand, like snacks in the rehearsal room or technical components for the build of our energy generating tech. So now we've calculated our impact, we can identify where we still produce emissions and could target reduction in those areas next year. So for example, our technology could save us tons of carbon emissions in its lifetime, but because of the environmental impact of buying the components firsthand, we won't be making any more after our dance floor, even if that means only working in buildings with renewable energy suppliers as we upscale our work. The key suggestion I'd really like to share with you all today is the importance of monitoring your carbon impact and publicly sharing your findings in order to encourage other artists, organizations, and venues to do the same. Some organizations do already calculate their impact, but don't share it, or they do already do amazing measures, but they don't share what they're doing because they're worried that people will then blame them for the things they're not. But by sharing your impact and the measures you already do today, what you're doing is encouraging others to start monitoring and reducing their own, publicizing the methods that you've already put into practice and holding yourself accountable to reducing your remaining impact. So there's more on how we calculated our impact and our methods to create sustainable theatre on our website. But the final thing I wanted to leave you with today was one thing that I couldn't fit in anywhere else, which is that we believe that theatre by itself wouldn't necessarily convert an audience member from someone who's never paid attention to climate change to an eco-warrior within 1 hour. But with workshops and engagement activities around the show, and with putting your money where your mouth is in terms of changing your practice so that it is genuinely sustainable, we believe that theatre can initiate a conversation or encourage a conversation so that audiences leave and they're slightly further along their journey towards someone who takes climate action and feels hopeful when they think about their future. Thanks so much for listening to me, and it's a real pleasure to be here today.
Thank you very much. Carbon neutral theater. I mentioned that name. Pigov Theater is carbon neutral theater. From the beginning to the end, including workshop after the show, you are considering carbon footprint and climate change. As I was listening to your presentation, I thought about cooperation and sharing. Cooperation and sharing are words that we use most often nowadays, right? Regarding climate change, Boram Kim also mentioned about alternatives. We need more options, but without know-how, we cannot really find options. Who do we work with? Who are our partners? What do I have on the table? What do I know? How can I share it? I think these are also very important questions to ask. We will also have time to hear about others' partners, others' experience about finding partners. It will be also nice to hear about finding partners. Last but not least, we have Sangtal Bilodo, founder and writer from Climate Change Their Action. She focuses on not only science and policy, but also on art and climate change. Let's hear about her experience as a playwright and about Climate Change Theater Action.
Thank you very much, and hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be talking to you from New York, 9:40 in the morning. I am a white woman wearing glasses. I have dark hair and a ponytail, and I'm wearing a bright pink sweatshirt. I'm going to share my screen now. Today, I'm talking to you about Climate Change Theater Action, which is a project of the Arctic Cycle, of which I am an artistic director. Climate Change Theater Action, what it is a global festival of readings and performances of short plays about the climate crisis. That was started in 2015 and is presented every other year. The way it works is we commission 50 playwrights from around the world to write a short play about 5 minutes long about an aspect of climate change based on a theme. And this year, the theme is envisioning a global Green New Deal. Once we have this collection of 50 plays, we make them available to anyone around the world who is interested in presenting an event in their own community. And we say, please present your event within 3 months, that's in the fall, between mid-September and mid-December, so everyone is presenting more or less at the same time. And we also say, in addition to the performance, please include an action. And we define action as being something that brings people together who normally wouldn't encounter each other, or something that increases or that encourages a greater engagement with the climate crisis. Where these events happen is really broad. So our goal is to make this festival as flexible as possible and to invite as many people as possible to participate. So people can participate whether they have resources or not, whether they make a really big event or a small one. And here's some examples of where some of the events have happened. In theaters, of course, also in educational settings, universities, high schools, and middle schools. Outdoors in parks, street corners, backyards, sometimes in cafes and bars, also in public spaces like libraries, churches, community centers, yoga studios, museums. Some have been very inventive. There has been, some years ago, there was an event that was presented at the foot of a glacier in Alaska. And 2 years ago, there was also an event that took place with people in kayaks in Florida. There's been, even before the pandemic, there were some radio shows and podcasts, and now with the pandemic, there's also some Zoom presentations. And the advantage of this in terms of sustainability is that the plays are the things that travel. So the text travels, but the performances are local. It's not like a touring show where we take a whole team and we go to another place. We send the plays and then we say to people, okay, now these plays come from all over the place. So you have a chance to address local issues and to think about the global impact of these issues. People are also welcome to add materials of their own. So we ask them to use at least one play from our collection, but they can add plays by local playwrights or include music or visual arts. They can essentially make the event anything they like. I said we encourage people to have an action as part of their performance. Here are some examples. And again, the action, they can choose to do whatever they want. So here are some examples of what has been done before. Some groups have chosen to make donations to environmental organizations. In 2017, in the US, we had big hurricanes that created a lot of devastation. So at that time, there was a lot of hurricane donations made to hurricane relief efforts. There has been some tree planting initiatives and donations to food banks. Also, on a more political front, letters are sent to government representatives. Sometimes it's phone calls. Sometimes it's marches. I'll show you a few photos after, and you'll see one of those marches. Pledges, people will say, will choose to pledge to do something in the coming month or in the coming year that they were not doing before to reduce their carbon footprint. In universities in particular, it's a chance for university departments to reach out to other departments. People who again, who don't normally work together can come together. So often a theater department will reach out to a science department and bring scientists to do presentations. Or there has been, especially lately, people have reached out a lot to local environmental organizations and asked them to make presentations on what they're working on at the moment. Another thing that often happens is the groups that organize the events will put a list of resources together, local resources for people to have a chance to see how they can get involved if they want to. Our goals with this program is several goals actually. One is to create alternative narratives about the climate crisis. So the mainstream media very much focuses on natural disasters and policy failures. And as B showed with her statistics about young people, it creates a sense of powerlessness and a sense of despair because we only hear that that we're failing. So with these short plays, as you heard, our theme for this year was envisioning a Green New Deal. So it's very much oriented towards the positive. What are the things that are happening that maybe we don't hear about? What is the good work that people are doing? What are the ways we are succeeding? Of course, there is still a lot to do and a lot that is not working well, but we also need to have a sense of what is possible, what is working at the moment that could be scaled up, what are the values we are embracing that are useful in order to change the narrative on a bigger scale. But at least with this project, we can change the narratives on a small scale. Another one of our goals is to bring audiences together around shared values. One thing that I've been hearing a lot is audience members saying, I didn't know there were that many people in my neighborhood, in my community, who had the same values, who had the same concerns. People feel a lot of the time feel isolated with these concerns, and when they can meet other people around them who have the same values and concerns, then they feel a sense of community, and they feel that they feel some support, and also they feel like more is possible. Strengthening community bonds. So there is something to be said about gathering around personal stories, which is what the theater can provide, as opposed to gathering around a scientific lecture or some political event. The personal stories invite people to, as it says in the next goal, to reflect and to explore. So while as science will present the facts, a play can say, here's how a human being responds to this situation, or here how a human being is concerned, what their concerns are about this situation. And it invites audience members to bring their subjective opinions, right? So it's not, the climate crisis is not just about fact, but it's about how we're feeling about it and how we feel we can have an impact in what our place in the world is at this particular moment. And a play invites people to bring all of these things, not just the very logical part of their brain, but also all of their emotions, everything they're feeling around this issue. We also, one of our goals is to encourage greater individual and collective action or engagement. And that's why we invite people, the groups who are organizing the events, to include an action. And we try to, of course, keep our carbon footprint low. By this year, we provided a little bit of a guide that was put together by an organization in New York City called Broadway Green Alliance that has a list of principles that people can follow to try to keep their carbon footprint as low as possible when they put up events. And another thing that we do is we encourage people to offset their carbon footprint if they can. And we, of course, don't travel. We just let the play travels. We let the plays travel. Just to give you an idea of the scope of the project, in 2019, which is the last time we did it, it happens every other year, we presented over 225 events in 25 countries. We ask people after they do the event to give us a sense of who participated, how many audiences were in attendance, and we ask them for feedback. So that's how we know there were a total of 3,000 artists and organizers. These are the people who put the event together and participated directly in them. And a total of 25,000 audiences. Most were live, and there were a few that were from digital media. Events, just a sense of where they happened. They've taken place in Canada, the US, UK, Germany, several countries in Europe, the Philippines, India, in Africa, Jamaica, in the South Pacific, and including Australia. So it's really all over. And I wanted to tell you one more thing about this. Oh, yeah. So if I take an example of New York City, in order to produce a fairly small theater show in a small venue that would be 99 seats or less, you would need probably between $40,000 and $60,000 US. And this would be for probably 14 presentations. Yeah, 14 to 18 performances. So it's a lot of money and maybe 20 artists would participate and a total of 500 people would see the show. It takes about, in 2019, we had about that same amount of money, $60,000 US, and these were our numbers. So the return for the investment is much greater. We have more people who participate and more people who attend for the same amount of money. And here are some photos of, I think I skipped one. Yes. Here are some photos of some of the events that have taken place over the year. This first one is very recent in New York City. This was on September 19th this year. And this was our kickoff event for Climate Change Theater Action 2021. Every time we do this festival, we do a kickoff event in New York City, and this was ours. Because of the pandemic, we had planned it to be outside to make sure that we could still gather. So we presented it in Central Park, and had it not been for the pandemic, I don't know that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have thought of doing something outside, and I'm so glad I did. We had a beautiful day, which makes it much easier to be excited about what we did than if it had rained. But it was amazing to think and talk about all these things while being directly in environment instead of being in a room, where everything is controlled inside. Another event that took place this year was at the University of Colorado. They have participated every year, and I think they have scaled their event every year. So you can see here it's pretty fully mounted production and pretty high production values. Blooming Ludus, who we saw, presented something in Seoul in 2019. And I'm very excited that they're participating again this year. And they were Blooming Lotus were the recipients of a micro grant for the event that they're presenting this year. We allocated 5 micro grants, and they were one of the winners. This was an event by Native Earth, which is an Indigenous organization in Toronto in Canada in 2019. NYU, New York University in Abu Dhabi also participated in 2019. They presented readings of the play, so much more simple, a simpler event, but presented outside, but still very impactful. Natalia Martinez, who is a costume designer who lives now she's in New York, but she was in Buenos Aires. She presented this event in 2017 where she designed all of the costumes for the performance. And also in 2017, I talked about marches before. Massey University in New Zealand organizes march where the students dressed as penguins and they marched from the parliament to university. So they did a reverse march. Instead of walking to the parliaments, they walked the other way in the reverse direction to make a statement about how the government wasn't doing enough about climate change. And then they all went to the university and they presented the show there. When we finish with a year, so at the end of this year, in December, when we're done with all the presentations, we put the plays together and we publish them in an anthology. So the first year in 2015, we didn't have a chance to, it was too new, we didn't have a chance to do this, but Where is the Hope is the anthology from 2017, and Lighting the Way is the anthology from 2019. The next one from this year will be coming out in 2022. And this is it. Thank you very much. If you want more information, you can go to our website at climatechangetheateraction.com.
Thank you very much. We just heard from Climate Change Theater Action, and it included slide about blaming Ludus. So there is solidarity and cooperation already going on. And it was really interesting. One of the keywords seemed to be theater, but then we talked about art and action. Art and action seem to be so connected. Has it ever happened before? Is it more often now? Art seems to be connected to action now. One more thing. Well, climate change theater action seems to explore how audience can participate. How can audience participate in arts? So we seem to be all thinking about how we can engage audience more. We heard from individual artists and the groups as well. We also heard about festivals. We have about 30 minutes now, which will be dedicated to discussion and questions. We can ask questions to each other. I will be asking questions, and we are joined by other artists and producers. They will also join discussion session. Let me give you a few questions first. I guess the questions have been already covered by the presentations, but still, we all realize the urgent issue of climate change. In short, maybe for 2 years or for longer, we've been working on this topic. So why do we need to pay attention and respond to climate change as artists? Maybe we think the answer is obvious, but let's think deeper. What can art do here? What's the power that only art can have? Sangtao shared that we can have positive energy, positive power. When we talk about climate change, the discussion can be easily very depressing. We talk about dystopian world. The young people do not believe in the future. They are depressed. They lost hope. But what can art do here? How can art bring about more positive energy and more positive vibe? I've been thinking about this topic. Can we talk about what art can do here? So what do you think is the power of art in this area? Who will go first? I don't want to call out names here. Can we hear from Blooming Lotus first?
For
Is it okay?
sure.
Yeah, Francia, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. I think that we as humans have designed the system that is causing climate change. So it's the same process to begin to tell a story of how we change again. I think that I really want to see more ideas and more imagining of where we can go. And as Chantal pointed out, in a lot of media, we're surrounded by very negative stories or ideas that reinforce that this is the way it is. But things have only been this way for what, 100 years, 200 years? So I think that theater really has the power for us to imagine a new future. And as Bia talked about, initiating that conversation, that spark that comes from inside to imagine something different. It has to start there.
What about Hyewon Lee? You're
Yeah, I
from the
think
same
Francine
team?
got the point already, but just adding to that, we make theater to make the space to play and experience and also experiment. And we talked about failing earlier from other panels, but it's really about imagining a different new world. And the theater also can bring different sensory experiences. So even though we understand from very different perspectives, like every culture, even all these panels tonight or today, we're coming from very different backgrounds, but to share this story and about how we are in the same planet, I think art is a very effective way to make communication, make conversations, and kind of safe, making a safe ground for everybody to participate together.
Right. Who will go next? What about Chantal? You shared a lot in the presentation, but can you still add further to that?
Yes, the arts in general, any discipline, the arts is an act of imagination where we take something that doesn't exist and we bring it into existence. And just that very practice is what we need to address the climate crisis. The scientists have been saying for a long time, we have the science, we've been telling everybody about this science. More science, talking about more science is not going to change anything anymore. It would have happened by now. So we need different ways to touch people and to encourage people to do something. And I think calling on everybody's imagination to imagine what we want to see in the future, not just fixing what's here now and what's broken, but how do we make our world better? I think the arts have a big role to play in helping us all imagine that.
Right. Also, we heard about toast and work. Boram Kim, what about you? I think there's some conflicting thought that you have, but I think you're also thinking about proceeding with what you're doing now.
In my case, as an artist, the only thing I can do is art. However, last year, as I was going through the pandemic, comparing to the subject that I was working on previously, it's not really appropriate to this time anymore. So I had a time to stop everything. And then during that time, I really looked deeply into the climate crisis. And I thought I could talk about this subject. So the performance that I'm working on right now that I presented, while I was working on that, I felt something. When I think about why I'm working about climate crisis, I felt a sense of responsibility. That sense of responsibility is that I consumed a lot. I made the earth this way. During my creative works, I made the large amount of waste. I'm in my 40s, and uh, the people who are in the 40s like made the earth this way. So I felt great sense of responsibility. It could be said that the previous generation are also responsible, but as I was talking to the people, the box collectors, they were in their 70s, and as I was explaining my work to them, I didn't really say many words, and they immediately understood and said it's a really critical works, and they were already doing many things to put into action. So when they wash their hair, they don't use shampoos anymore. They use vinegar, and then they use the wastewater to flush the toilet. So in fact, many senior citizens, including my mother, they're already taking a lot of actions. But however, my generation, rather than doing an action, like we consume a lot. And because of that, I feel a great sense of responsibility, and then that's why I continue my work.
Thank you for sharing that. Boram asked if it is better than making a toast, a bread, and one person commented on that. I'm going to read it. It's from one of the participants. The concern of Boram posed a question. It's about ideology, belief of artists, and it's also about responsibility for society, and it is difficult to answer. Knowing it, having idea about it, believing in something are already difficult thing to do. There is already challenge. When artists believe in something and take action, there is ethics. It could be also connected to aesthetics. So this comment was rather very long, and I just read it. Okay, there is no way to resolve that concern. We cannot say that it is better than making bread. We cannot easily answer that. But it's about building art. It's about leading to art from thought, so it's valuable. Actually, the comment was longer. I'm going to show it to Boram later. This comment, I believe, just talked about change of thinking, change of thought. We are facing the problem of 1.5 degrees Celsius. We cannot resolve the problem right away, but we can still make our audience think about climate change. We can make them change their thinking about climate change. So maybe that's what the comment was about. There's one question. Wait a minute. I'm trying to read from the screen. It's a question to B. Question to Pig Theater. About audience and climate change. You talked about engaging audience more, and it was really impressive. You also talked about workshops, right? It was really interesting. Can you share more about the workshops that you had? Can you share concrete examples?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So we've run a variety of different workshops. We usually create a specific workshop around each show. So with our family show, we took it into schools and we did a workshop which explored points on the school curriculum, as well as getting the kids. So the kids we were working with were from age 7 to age 11. We also got them creating their own little pieces of theatre and performance art. So we were trying to do two things. We were trying to educate them more about climate change and climate actions they can take, but also develop a love of theatre. and an understanding of how art can be a voice for change and a method to induce action in others, as we've been talking about today. And then the workshops around our show Hot in Here are run with local activists in each area. So we will be touring the show next spring and summer. And in each area, we're working with a local partner and a local activist, and they will be running public engagement events in the run up and after we're there with the show. And then during the workshop itself, which will be on the same day as we're performing the show, we will look at ways that local people can get involved in action and combine art with action. And that will also feature a panel conversation between the local activist and a global climate advocate who's been doing the same action in their local area on the same day. So say the local activist in Liverpool in the UK has done a litter pick in the area around the theatre that day. They will then Zoom an activist in Nigeria who's done a litter pick in their local area on that day. So that workshop's really trying to create two different communities of climate warriors in different parts of the world. And those are just two examples of workshops that we have done in the past. And we really view them as important as our show, because it's just a fantastic way to get audience members talking and properly engaging with each other and what's going on in their kind of local area and what they can get involved in.
Right. So audience are no longer passive viewers. They can be more proactive. They can engage in actions for climate change, which is very important. As I was listening, I thought we work with audience a lot. We work with game as well. In a way, it's different from audience being passive. How do we communicate with them? How do we make audience take action? That seems to be important keyword. When we create art, how do we make audience participate? I think this is also linked to the format of shows. Can you also share your thought on this matter? I'm going to ask that question to Blooming Ludas. Blooming Ludas has been working on various formats of shows. I'm also going to ask that question to Chantal.
Maybe I can go first. So similar to the Pigfoot Theatre, our company also engages the audience in a very different ways. We also run community theatre workshops often before or after the show, or even during the show. And we already call our theatre company a participatory theatre company. So we are keeping these different experiments on like the formation of theatre to make more immersive and more participatory experience, so the audience can be part of this experience and exploration, kind of going through this journey of climate crisis together. And Francine, maybe you can add more.
Yeah, when we started with Power Story, that was a very good crash course into that. One version of the show, we invited the audience as new employees of a power plant. So that was the invitation for the audience to begin the show together. And they go through the process of training for the new power plant as employees. We then changed it to a community meeting. And another version of the show was a town in the future where it was experiencing constant blackouts. And this town in the future was celebrating their 500-year anniversary but these blackouts kept happening. And some fantastical characters invited the audience, the townspeople, to come and infiltrate the power station and take back the energy for themselves. So we played a lot with the story and who the audience was in the performance. That was a really big question we had. And that changed a bit as we made more shows. How much space do we need for living? About sustainable housing. That was really an invitation for audiences to come and build a house together out of cardboard boxes. That was our first version. And in 90 minutes, we build a house together. We ask ourselves what we think is essential for living. And that starts to bring up all sorts of questions about our neighborhood, what we consume, how we're connected to ourselves and the places that we live in. And then the house we created together falls apart and is redeveloped. And we start to ask some of those questions about change. So we're always thinking about who the audience is in the story and what are we asking them to think about through the action that we do together.
Thank you. Chantal, the floor is now
Yes,
yours.
thank you. That sounds wonderful, Francine, what you just described. So I can talk a little bit about this kickoff event I mentioned in my presentation in Central Park, what we did in terms of audience participation. Some of the plays we chose to present included audience participation. For example, there was one play that's the performer telling a story to the audience, and there's some back and forth. So there's like a call and response where the performer says, okay, the story is not coming, you have to help me bring the story forth. So the audience gets to participate in that way. And then there's also some piece of papers, little piece of dialogue that is passed around that is read by the audience. So the play cannot happen without the audience participating. In another play, there was some objects involved. So the audience had to have something living. They had to collect something living, something recycled. Then they get to eat something sweet at the end. So again, there was some participation. And then on our end, to tie the whole thing together, we created, we offered the climate ribbon ritual. We didn't create it. This is something that exists already. And the climate ribbon was, they started in 2014, I believe. And it's an arts ritual where they ask people, it varies slightly from event to event, but the way we did it is we asked people, the first question is, what do you love and hope to never lose to climate chaos? And then the audience were given a ribbon and they write their response on the ribbon. And they carried this ribbon throughout the performance. This was asked at the very beginning. They carried this ribbon throughout the performance. And at the very end, as part of the last play, they're asked, what is an intention that you have in relation to the climate crisis? And then they write that on the flip side of the ribbon. Then they take this ribbon and they hang it. We had an arch, so all the ribbons were hung on an arch so that people could read each other's ribbon. And they created this beautiful image of all these ribbons flying in the wind, in a sort of a visual representation of everybody's hopes and intentions.
Thank you very much for that answer. So, we're discussing climate change, and discussion and communication seem to be very important when it comes to climate change. This is all connected to making audience participate and translating arts into action. Let's now talk more about green mobility, not just mobility, it's about green mobility. Around 70%, 78% of carbon footprint seems to come from audience transportation, right? When we talk about transportation, There's audience, there's creators, and there's also actors. There are artists as well. And we are thinking about green mobility in the pandemic era. Text can move, and text can be also used to create art. And I think this is important case about green mobility as well. And Blooming Lotus, you mentioned that you haven't been able to meet each other for years. You are far away from each other, and I'm sure thought about green mobility a lot. How do artists meet? How do artists collaborate? How do we have green mobility and pursue art at the same time? I'm asking this question to Blooming Lotus because you are far away from each other now.
To be honest, we are two theater makers who really love clowning, physical theater, and improvisation. So we love to be in the space together. But because of our situations, we are based in Seoul and Halifax at the moment. We're trying to find the most ecological way to work together. So before the pandemic, we tried to find good schedule for both of us so we can gather like once a year to run a big project together, and then we come back with the project. And after the pandemic, we had to make it more focused online. But I think this became a good shift for us to think how to run an international theater company, even though we are just two people. And then we started more focusing on each other's like local community and to making connection through our company. So our climate change theater action this year is running that way as well.
I think it's helped us a lot while considering green mobility and when we can physically be together. As Haewon said, it's really helped us dive deeper into the conversation we have between Canada and Korea, and also our original home where the company started in the UK. So I feel like we've thought a lot more about space, creating space for international audiences and creating space for dialogue. And thank you so much to everyone who is translating today, because we have a small feeling of what that is and how that is a part of green mobility. There is the possibility that I might try to go on a boat back to the UK at some point instead of a plane. I would like to try that experience personally, although it is a bit frightening, but I think it is good to think about that. Yeah, there's still a lot more we could do. So it's the beginning of that thought of how we can work together internationally.
Yeah, we actually get more creative when we start to think about how to make this green mobility really works together, and to think of like how much we need this mobility and why do we need to move at this moment is a good kind of initiating discussion moment, I think.
Thank you very much. We have many questions and limited amount of time. So I'm going to give a comprehensive last question. When we work, we face challenges, not to mention barriers. What are your challenges and barriers? I want to hear more about it. One person asked this question. Artists are here and there are challenges and solidarity. What's the ultimate goal? What's your future direction? Can you also answer this question? Your goal and future direction? And can you also talk about your challenges and barriers? How will you overcome and resolve challenges? Okay, this is a very broad question, but I'm going to still ask it. Can you hear from each one? Can we go in the order of a presentation today? So, Boram Kim?
When facing the subject of climate crisis, so currently, the biggest question that I have is what does it mean to have a level of completion in art? So there's design aspect, or it could be about the content. In my case, like there is what is shown to the audience in my exhibition, and at the same time, when people experience, like there are feelings that occur, like there are many visual elements as well. So when it comes to that, what are my desires, and what does it mean for me to reach a certain level of completion is the question that I have. And I wonder whether that is a situation that is shifting or changing. It is something that remains to be seen. So please follow my activity. Thank you.
Next, Blooming Lotus.
I think because we've been not in the same place for quite a while, so Francine and I might be slightly on a different page, but my challenge and my goal at the moment is to keep doing this with hope. So how to grab my hope and how to be resilient in this moment of climate crisis is my question. And I'm trying to find more connections with our body and our connection to the planet, and making these sensory experiences like wider so we can be engaged with more diverse audiences together.
Challenges, yes. Finding all the ways to work with Heywan all the time, and hopefully seeing each other soon within the next 12 months and finding a way to do that. Um, Goals and future movement, creating new rituals. I think that there is a lot of question in Canada about how to create rituals, especially from a white Western perspective, and where our rituals come from, and how we self-locate within our place. So I'm doing a lot of exploration into local ecology. And as Heywan said too, connection. How can our work as Blooming Ludus encourage our audience's connection to themselves and their environment? I think that the sensory does have a huge impact. It's very easy to put things in your head sometimes and understand something intellectually, but then how is that connected to the body and to space? That's very important, and your everyday life. So it's both the challenge and the goal, connection, and discovering connection through ritual and art making.
Thank you very much. B, the floor is yours now.
Yeah, so I think our biggest barriers as a company are remaining carbon neutral. That every time we upscale our work, there are about 30 new things we need to think about. And then our other one is attracting non-climate audiences. So if a theatre show is clearly about climate change, the vast majority of audiences who go see it will be interested in climate change. So you're sort of preaching to the converted, but we try to view, like Haiwan was just saying, we try to view, as Blooming Ludus, I think you maybe both said this, was just saying, we try to view challenges as opportunities for growth, and we also have started going directly into schools and working with local communities, because that sort of bypasses the issue of only people who are already interested in climate and theatre will see this show. And then our goal is really, as we've all been saying today, connection. So connection between organisations. So we've been thinking a lot recently about, in the UK, there are so many disparate climate groups that are all doing very cool things, but no one talks to each other. And so no one learns from each other. And actually this panel's really made me think, why have we just been thinking about the UK? That's true of the whole world. There are so many climate theatre groups doing the same thing. And just our goal, I guess, would be, helping to contribute to a way we can all communicate with each other more easily.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Sang Tao.
In terms of challenges, I would say taking the art about climate change and theater about climate change is put into a box, just like some years ago, women theater or Black theater was put into a box, and I think it's doing a disservice. And I would like that to be open up. Climate change is our reality. We're all experiencing it in different ways. It doesn't need to be this like highly specific thing. I think it should be part of theater in general. And that's a way where we're going to reach different kinds of audiences. In terms of vision for the future, I'm thinking about healing. How can we help people heal? The last 2 years have been very hard socially, emotionally, and environmentally. And everybody's has a lot of anxiety and carrying a lot of pain. And I'm wondering how, with the theater, while addressing these really difficult issues, how can we facilitate healing for everybody?
Thank you. It's late. Well, it's late in Korea. We're joined by so many different time zones to discuss one theme, climate change and art. Among our discussions, we found many keywords. I believe we will be thinking about similar keywords: art, action, connection, sharing, audience, how to make audience join, and local. And not to mention hope, unlimited imagination of art. What can we do with that? It's afternoon in Europe, I believe, and it's going to be night in Korea. In North America, it's going to be morning. We're in different time zones, but we can think about this sharing theme, the same theme, climate change and arts. I believe we can further continue our discussion that way. That was the last session of day 2. Tomorrow we have more sessions. Stay tuned. We're going to continue thinking about next mobility. Thank you again for joining us. I'd like to extend my gratitude to panelists. I wish we can meet each other again. And we wish for more participation, not just from Korea, but from other countries. And let me wrap up this session with that. Thank you.